Brittney Griner is 35 years old, and she just filed for divorce from Cherelle Griner, the same woman who once stood in front of cameras and fought a Russian court, a foreign government, and public opinion itself just to bring her home. 8 years of marriage, a 2-year-old son, a documentary that showed the entire world how deeply these two women love each other. And now, all of it sits inside a single case file at a Fulton County courthouse. So what actually happened? And just as importantly, what hasn't been confirmed, no matter how many headlines act like it has? Stick with this video, because by the end, you'll have a clear, honest picture of exactly where the story stands right now. Nobody was expecting this. Not the fans, not the sports media, and certainly not the millions of people who had just spent the previous month watching Brittney and Cherelle Griner sit side by side on a podcast, openly discussing IVF injections and embryo transfers like two people with nothing to hide. Then, on July 30th, everything changed. Brittney Griner filed a complaint for divorce in the Superior Court of Fulton County, Georgia. Within hours, reporters across the country had copies of the filing. According to the paperwork, the couple married on June 18, 2018, and had been separated since July 24th, just 6 days before Brittney filed. The language in the complaint is direct. Griner describes the marriage as irretrievably broken, with no hope of reconciliation, and she's asking the court to grant the divorce. She's seeking joint legal and physical custody of the couple's 2-year-old son, Bash, along with child support, and what the filing calls an equitable division of marital assets and debts. She's also asking to keep certain property as separate, anything she acquired before the marriage, or received as an inheritance or an individual gift. An attorney representing Brittney gave a brief, careful statement once the news broke, saying only that this is a matter the two of them hope to resolve privately, with nothing further to add. Representatives for Cherelle did not immediately respond to media requests, and as of now, neither woman has issued a joint statement or spoken publicly about the filing in her own words. The timing is what really caught people off guard. Just weeks earlier, Brittney and Cherelle had appeared together on the Mom podcast, hosted by WNBA guard Skylar Diggins and broadcaster Cassidy Hubbarth, warmly reflecting on their path to parenthood through IVF. Days before that, they'd publicly celebrated Bash turning 2, with both women posting affectionate birthday tributes that gave no hint of what was coming. There's also a small but telling detail buried in the paperwork. For years, plenty of outlets and countless fan pages repeated 2019 as the year Brittney and Cherelle got married. The actual court filing lists the date as June 18, 2018. It's a minor discrepancy, but it's a good reminder of how much common knowledge about public figures never actually gets checked against a legal document before it spreads online. At the center of all this is a 35-year-old Olympic gold medalist who has spent more than a decade changing what people thought was possible for a woman her size on a basketball court. Griner is a 10-time WNBA All-Star who spent 11 seasons with the Phoenix Mercury, followed by 1 season with the Atlanta Dream in 2025, and now a fresh 1-year deal worth roughly $1.19 million with the Connecticut Sun heading into the 2026 season. At Baylor, she led the team to an undefeated 40-0 season during her junior year, still the only perfect season in the program's history, and she holds the WNBA's all-time career dunk record by a wide margin. None of that made headlines this time. This time, it was her marriage. It's worth pointing out the financial contrast in her career, too. Despite roughly 11 seasons as one of the WNBA's most recognizable stars, her total league salary over that span barely topped $1 million, a stark illustration of the pay gap that's long existed between men's and women's professional basketball. The league's newer collective bargaining agreement has started to close that gap with higher salaries and better benefits, but for most of Griner's career, her real income came from elsewhere. Lucrative overseas contracts during the WNBA offseason, endorsement deals, book royalties, and real estate investments. Her estimated net worth currently sits around $5 million, a figure expected to keep climbing as her Connecticut Sun salary and the league's growing media deals kick in. Before getting into what actually might be behind the split, it helps to understand exactly how far Cherelle Griner went to bring her wife home from a Russian penal colony, because that history is exactly why this divorce filing has hit fans so hard. Long before any divorce filing existed, Cherelle Griner was known for one thing above everything else: refusing to give up on her wife when the situation looked hopeless. Cherelle and Brittney met years earlier as students at Baylor University, where Brittney was already building a legendary college basketball career, and Cherelle was studying political science and government with a minor in family and child studies. They reconnected later, after Brittney's first marriage had ended, and their relationship grew quietly, away from the spotlight that would eventually follow them everywhere. Cherelle went on to earn her law degree from North Carolina's Central University School of Law, graduating in May 2022, and her background as a working attorney would end up maturing more than almost anyone could have predicted just months later. The couple got engaged in 2018, after Brittney's earlier marriage had ended. In February 2022, Brittney Griner was detained at a Moscow airport after Russian authorities said they found vape cartridges containing hashish oil in her luggage, an offense treated with serious weight under Russian law. What followed was nearly 10 months of imprisonment, a Russian court proceeding, and a 9-year sentence that stunned people who had followed her career for years. Cherelle became the public face of the campaign to bring her home, speaking to reporters, appearing at press conferences, and refusing to let her wife's case disappear from a news cycle even as the war in Ukraine dominated global headlines at the same time. Cherelle has since spoken candidly about how emotionally difficult that stretch was. She's described the couple deliberately talking through which parts of their long-delayed IVF process they still wanted to experience together, a conversation that became urgent once it was clear Brittney's release was anything but guaranteed. Brittney herself later told People magazine that during her detention, she wondered whether the family they had planned would ever actually happen, and that she found herself questioning how she could possibly ask Cherelle to keep waiting through a 9-year sentence neither of them had chosen. Brittney was ultimately released in December 2022 as part of a prisoner exchange between the United States and Russia, a deal that remains one of the more debated diplomatic moments of that period, partly because Marine veteran Paul Whelan, who had been detained in Russia far longer than Griner, was not included in the swap. That decision drew public criticism at the time, criticism that both Brittney and Cherelle have acknowledged directly in later interviews rather than avoiding. Cherelle's advocacy didn't stop once her wife came home. She kept speaking publicly about wrongful detentions and eventually became an executive producer on the Brittney Griner story, the ESPN documentary that premiered at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival and gave audiences an unusually intimate look at both women navigating that ordeal together as a couple. That documentary is worth pausing on because it makes the current divorce filing land even harder. Reviewers who saw it in Park City described it as just as much a portrait of Brittney and Cherelle's marriage as it was a retelling of the detention itself, built around home footage, quiet domestic moments, and what looked on screen like a genuinely solid partnership. Watching that footage now, only months after its premiere and against the backdrop of a fresh divorce filing, creates exactly the kind of contrast that his fans across social media are struggling to reconcile. Strip away the last 2 weeks of headlines, and what's left is a public record of a marriage that, for most of its existence, looked stable, loving, and remarkably open. Brittney's relationship with Cherelle began after her brief first marriage to fellow basketball player Glory Johnson ended. That earlier marriage lasted barely a year. Griner filed for an annulment on grounds of duress and fraud before the divorce was finalized in 2016. She and Johnson share twin daughters, Soleil Diem and Ava Simone, born in October 2015, though a court later ruled Griner has no biological connection to the girls, since Johnson conceived using her own egg and a donor's sperm during a period when the two were already separating. By contrast, Brittney's relationship with Cherelle followed a far steadier path. The two built a life together long before Bash arrived, and based on a marriage date in the divorce filing. They had already been legally married for 6 years by the time they announced they were expecting their first child in April 2024. Bash was born that July, just before Brittney left for Paris to compete in the Olympics, where she added a third gold medal to a summer that already included the biggest personal milestone in her life. Getting there wasn't simple. Cherelle has explained that the couple deliberately timed their IVF process around Brittney's WNBA offseason and her own law school graduation, treating the process as something they were determined to go through together rather than hand off to anyone else. She's talked openly about the toll of the hormone injections and the physical strain on her body, and Brittney has said it was genuinely hard watching her wife go through that. Their plans were interrupted entirely by the Russian detention in 2022, then picked back up once Brittney came home, eventually resulting in 3 viable embryos, one of which became their son. Public affection between the two of them was constant throughout the marriage. Brittney regularly posted tributes to Cherelle around anniversaries, birthdays, and Mother's Day, often crediting her wife's strength for holding the family together during the hardest stretch of her career. Cherelle built her own public identity around motherhood and advocacy, appearing at award shows and premieres while continuing to practice law. The two attended the Met Gala together in 2023 while Cherelle was pregnant, walked red carpets during award season, and sat together at the premiere of the Brittney Griner story in January 2026, where Brittney was photographed visibly emotional as the audience rose to applaud. None of that history is erased by the divorce filing, and nothing in the court documents suggests any of it was untrue. What the filing actually confirms is narrow: a marriage date, a separation date, and requests around custody and property. The emotional reasons behind why two people who built that much of a life together decided to end it remain entirely private. Here's where a lot of entertainment coverage tends to manufacture certainty that simply doesn't exist, and it's worth being direct about that instead of pretending otherwise. As of the filing date, neither Brittney nor Cherelle has publicly explained what led to their separation. The complaint uses standard Georgia legal language, irretrievably broken, with no hope of reconciliation, phrasing that appears in the vast majority of no-fault divorce filings and, on its own, tells you nothing about the actual cause of a breakup. Brittney's attorney's request for privacy remains the closest thing to an official comment from either side, and it deliberately says nothing about motive. That silence hasn't stopped speculation from filling the gap. Some commentary points to the sheer physical distance the marriage endured. Brittney's overseas basketball obligations earlier in her career, back-to-back Olympic commitments in Tokyo and Paris, a stint in the unrivaled 3-on-3 league, and now a franchise change to the Connecticut Sun for 2026, all of which meant long stretches apart even during the best years of the relationship. Others point to the lingering psychological weight of the Russian detention itself, something reporters covering the couple have described as reshaping how both women approach stress, parenthood, and their relationship long after Brittney's release. None of that speculation has been confirmed by either woman, and treating it as a settled explanation would be exactly the kind of unverified leap this story doesn't need. Here's what can actually be said with confidence. Brittney Griner filed for divorce in Fulton County, Georgia, on July 30th, citing a separation date of July 24th. She's seeking joint custody of their son, child support, and an equitable division of property, while asking to retain certain separate assets. Cherelle has not filed a public response, and no interview, statement, or social media post from either woman has addressed the actual reason for the split. Everything beyond that is speculation dressed up as insight, and this is a couple whose own story, built on years of public honesty about an extraordinarily difficult decade, deserved better than invented drama. It's also worth sitting with how fast public perception can flip once a single legal filing enters a picture. 2 months ago, Brittney and Cherelle Griner were being celebrated as one of the more openly loving couples in professional sports, a pair who had survived an international incident together and were still willing to talk publicly about something as private as fertility treatment. Now, the same couple is the subject of divorce coverage built almost entirely around a 4-page legal filing and a handful of old interviews, with very little actual new information behind it. That gap between what people think they know and what has actually been confirmed is exactly where speculation moves fastest, and exactly where it deserves the most scrutiny before it gets repeated as fact. Whatever comes next, whether that a quiet private settlement or a more public chapter down the road, the facts on record paint a picture of 2 women who spent 8 years building something real, whether a crisis most couples never have to imagine, and are now navigating an ending that neither has chosen to explain publicly, at least not yet. Their son, Bash, remains at the center of both of their lives, and how his parents choose to co-parent him going forward may end up saying more about this story than any court filing ever will. That's where things stand right now. If either woman speaks publicly about what led to this, we'll be here to cover it accurately, not with guesses dressed up as certainty, but with what's actually been said and confirmed.